Father was standing at the kitchen island when I walked in. Not sitting, standing. That was the first sign. He had my laptop open in front of him. I knew before he said a word. "Sit down," he said. He didn't look up. I didn't sit. I leaned against the door frame and crossed my arms because some part of me already understood that I needed to be closer to the exit than he was. He turned the laptop around. On the screen was my Etsy shop. 3 years of ceramic work, mugs, bowls, small sculptural pieces, 347 sales, 4.9 stars. He'd found it. I don't know how. I'd kept it under a different name, a studio name, not my last name. But he'd found it. "Is this what you do?" he said, "instead of studying?" It wasn't a question. I was 26. I was in my second year of a master's in business administration at the University of Toronto, a program he'd essentially enrolled me in on my behalf. Calling the department head before I'd submitted my own application, writing the deposit check before I'd agreed to anything. I'd gone along with it the way I'd gone along with most things in our family. Not because I wanted to, but because the alternative was a conversation I didn't have the energy for. The ceramics had started in undergrad. A single elective I'd taken to fill a fine arts credit. My professor at the time had said something I've never forgotten, that clay remembers pressure, that if you push too hard in one place, the whole thing pulls. I thought about that a lot in that kitchen doorway, watching my father look at my work like it was evidence of something criminal. "I make money from it," I said. "Not a lot. At the time, maybe $1,800 a month after fees and materials, but money." "That's not the point," he said. "Then what is the point?" He closed the laptop. He was a cardiovascular surgeon. He'd been a cardiovascular surgeon for 31 years. He spoke slowly and precisely the way people do when they've spent their entire career in rooms where slow and precise means someone lives or dies, and he'd brought that same register home to every conversation we'd ever had about my future. "The point," he said, "is that you are wasting your potential on a hobby. The point is that I have given you every possible advantage and you are sitting in your room making cups." I want to say I said something brilliant. I didn't. I said they're not just cups. He told me to grow up. I told him I was going to keep doing it. He said if that's how I felt, I should find somewhere else to live. He said it the way he said most things, not loudly, not dramatically, just as a statement of fact. The way you'd say a patient's ejection fraction was 30%. Matter of fact. Final fact. I went upstairs. I packed a bag. I came back down and he was in the living room reading, and I told him I'd come back for the rest of my things when he was at the hospital. He didn't answer. My mother was in the dining room. She'd been in the dining room the whole time. She'd heard everything and she didn't come out. That was the part I kept coming back to later, lying in my friend's spare room in the annex. Not my father's words. My mother staying in that room. I want to be honest about the next few months because I think the version I told people at the time left things out. I was not fine. I was not immediately liberated. I slept badly for the first 6 weeks. Woke up at 3 a.m. running calculations about tuition and rent and whether my business was actually viable or whether I'd been deluding myself, whether my father was right about everything and I'd just been too proud to hear it. I was living with my friend. We'd known each other since second year of undergrad, had lived together briefly in a basement apartment on Palmerston, and she gave me her spare room for 3 months without asking for rent. She is one of 2 or 3 people in my life who I would describe as genuinely good without qualification. I finished my MBA. That surprised people when I told them later. I finished it because I'd started it, and also because the skills weren't useless. I understood them differently when I was learning them for myself, rather than for a future my father had mapped out. I understood cash flow statements. I understood how to read a market. I put those things to use. The ceramics work changed after I moved out. I don't know exactly how to explain it except to say that the pieces became less careful. More interesting, my friend said. She wasn't being nice. She was the kind of person who would tell you directly if something wasn't working. The work got looser. I started making larger sculptural pieces, less functional, more referential to the kind of work I'd always wanted to make, but had been doing after midnight when I was supposed to be studying. I started entering juried shows. The Gardener in Toronto had an emerging artist program. I got into it my first time applying. I won't pretend I knew where things were going. I didn't. For a long time, it just felt like momentum without a destination. I was making work. People were responding to it. I was paying rent. By then, I moved into a small studio apartment in Parkdale, but the shape of it wasn't clear. The shape became clear in the spring. I was 31 by then. A collector based in Vancouver had been following my work for about 14 months. I knew of her. She was well known in the Canadian contemporary art space, had a collection that spanned 3 decades of significant work, but I'd never communicated with her directly. Her assistant reached out through my gallery contact, said she was interested in acquiring several pieces and would I be available for a studio visit. I said yes, obviously. She came to the studio on a Tuesday in April. I'm not going to romanticize the meeting. She was businesslike in the way that people with serious money often are. Efficient with her attention, no small talk. She walked through the work slowly, asked specific questions, understood what she was looking at. Before she left, she asked whether I'd be interested in selling a larger body of work. Not pieces, the collection. A body of work I'd been developing over 3 years, around 40 major pieces. The ones that had been in 3 shows, including a solo show, at a small gallery in Kensington Market that had gotten a write-up in Canadian Art Magazine. I said I'd need to think about it and talk to my gallery. I thought about it for 72 hours. I talked to my gallery and to a lawyer. And then I said yes. The sale closed in June. $4.2 million. Canadian. After tax. And yes, there was tax. A significant portion classified as business income because I had been operating as a sole proprietor. My accountant worked with me over several months to manage it properly. I had just under $2.6 million. I sat in my accountant's office after we reviewed the final numbers and I looked at the figure on the paper and I thought, he told me they were just cups. I didn't tell my family. I want to explain why. Because it wasn't strategic, at least not entirely. My younger brother, he's 4 years younger, works in tech, lives in Waterloo, knew I was doing well with the ceramics in a general sense. We'd stayed in touch. He was the one who had texted me the night I left, just, "You okay?" 2 words, which from him was significant. We got coffee occasionally. He didn't ask about our parents, and I didn't ask him to relay anything to them. My mother had sent me one email, 6 months after I moved out, asking if I was eating enough and whether I needed money. It was signed with her name, No, Love, which I think she did deliberately to signal something, neutrality maybe, or distance from my father's position without openly contradicting it. I wrote back and said I was fine and thanked her and didn't ask any questions because I wasn't ready for the conversation that questions would open. My father didn't contact me at all, so when the sale happened, there was no one in my family to tell except my brother. And I told him in person over coffee in Waterloo, and he set down his cup and looked at me for a long moment and said, "Are you serious?" And I said yes, and he said, "I genuinely cannot believe you pulled that off," which was the best possible thing he could have said. He said, "Does Dad know?" I said no. I didn't push it. I bought property in Kelowna. I want to say something about why Kelowna and not Vancouver or Toronto, because I think it says something about what I was actually looking for. I visited the Okanagan once, years earlier, on a road trip with my friend after we finished undergrad. I remembered the quality of the light there, the way it came in sideways in the late afternoon over the lake, flat and golden and specific to that place. I remembered thinking, I could work here. The house was on the west side, up in the hills, with a view of Okanagan Lake from the studio space, which was a separate structure behind the main house, big windows facing north, the way good studio light should. It had been a private property with a small vineyard attached, which I had absolutely no interest in operating, but which added a quality to the land that I found unexpectedly moving. The idea of something being tended over time, pruned back so it could grow. The property was $1.3 million. I had the rest invested and managed. My accountant and a financial advisor I'd found through my lawyer helped me structure it properly. I'm telling you this because the people who ask the practical questions deserve actual answers. I moved in September. My brother came for the first weekend and helped me set up the studio. We drove into town and bought ridiculous quantities of groceries and cooked too much food and stayed up late talking the way we hadn't since we were teenagers. He said he was proud of me. I told him he was one of the only people in my family I hadn't wanted to disappear from. He said, "That's not a high bar." I laughed. He was right. The call came in November. My mother called my brother first, who called me, who told me to call my mother. That's how things worked in our family. Messages traveled through intermediaries because direct contact had been replaced at some point with this system of relays that I think everyone had gotten so accustomed to that no one noticed anymore how strange it was. My mother sounded the way she sounded when she was managing something difficult, controlled, surface-level calm. a slight compression in her voice that if you knew her, you could hear. She said my father had been diagnosed with a heart condition. I won't specify the details because they're not mine to share, but it required a procedure, and it was a wait time through the public system. And they were looking at private options, and those options were expensive. I listened. I said I was sorry to hear it. There was a pause. We thought, my mother said, that perhaps you might be in a position to help. I noticed the we. I noticed that she didn't say I. That meant my father knew about this call. That meant my father had agreed to it, or asked for it, which was its own kind of thing to sit with. How did you know I was in a position to help? I asked. Another pause. Your brother mentioned you'd had some success. My brother and I talked about this later. He hadn't mentioned the amount, just that I'd sold a significant body of work and was doing well. He said he was sorry if he'd overstepped. I told him he hadn't. He told the truth. That wasn't overstepping. How much are you looking at? I asked my mother. She told me. It was in the range of $30,000 to $40,000 for the procedure at a private cardiac clinic in Calgary, not counting travel and recovery costs. I thought about my father at the kitchen island, the laptop open. They're just cups. I thought about my mother in the dining room, the door she didn't come through. I need a few days, I said. Of course, she said. And then, and this is the part I've thought about most, she added, your father wants you to know he's glad you're doing well. I said, thank you for telling me. I got off the phone and sat in the studio for a long time watching the light change on the lake. It was late November, so it went fast. By 4:30, it was almost gone. I called my brother that evening. I told him what I was thinking. He listened without interrupting, which was his way, and when I finished, he said, that's your decision. I'll support whatever you decide. I said, that's not actually helpful. He said, I know, it's not my call, and I don't want to influence it. I said, okay, then tell me what you would do. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I would help, because I would need to be able to live with myself, but I would set the terms. I called my mother back the next afternoon. I said I was willing to help with the costs of the procedure. I would pay for the clinic directly, not give them money, pay the clinic, and I would cover the travel and accommodation up to a certain amount. I said I was doing this because he was my father, and because whatever had happened between us, I didn't want to be the reason he had a worse health outcome than he could have. I said it would be the one time. I said I wasn't prepared to be the family's financial resource going forward. I said that if that felt transactional, I understood, but those were my terms and they weren't negotiable. My mother said, I understand. I said, I'd like to hear that from him. There was a pause. Then she said she'd have him call me. He called that evening. I don't know what I expected. Some version of an apology, maybe? Or at least an acknowledgement of something. What he said was, I appreciate your help with this. His voice was exactly what it always was. Precise. Controlled. The voice of a man who had spent 31 years in high-stakes rooms and learned to flatten the affect out entirely. I said, I hope the procedure goes well. He said, thank you. That was it. I want to be honest about how I felt afterward because I don't think the clean version is accurate. I wasn't at peace. Or not immediately. I'd done the thing I thought I could live with, and I believe it was the right thing. But right things aren't always the things that resolve old grief. And I had old grief. More of it than I'd been willing to look at directly until I was sitting alone in a house in the Okanagan that I'd bought with money I'd made from work. My father told me to abandon. I started seeing a therapist that winter. I'm not saying that as a sidebar, it matters. She asked me in our third session what I needed from my family that I'd never received, and I said I didn't know. And she said that was fine. We'd figure it out. We spent a lot of time on the question of whether help could exist without approval, whether I could do something for someone without needing them to become different than they were. I'm still working on that. The procedure went well. My mother texted me when it was done, a short message, factual. I wrote back and said I was glad. My father never mentioned it again. I don't know if that's his version of gratitude or his version of pretending it didn't happen. Possibly both. My brother moved to Kelowna the following spring. He'd been talking about leaving Waterloo for a couple of years. The city had changed. His company had gone fully remote. He wanted a different pace. I didn't push it. But when he came back for a second visit and stood in the doorway of the studio watching me work and said, I really like it here, I told him I'd found a good property a few kilometers away that was listed under budget. He looked at me. I said, I'm not buying it for you. I'm telling you it exists. He bought it. He works from there now. Morning light, a home office with a view of the same lake from a slightly different angle. We have dinner most Wednesdays. Nothing formal, just whoever's cooking that week, which rotates. I finished a new body of work in February, 26 pieces, different in direction from the collection I'd sold. Less reliant on volume and repetition, more singular, each piece trying to say one specific thing. My gallery is talking about a show in the fall. I don't think about my father's kitchen much anymore. That surprises me a little, that it faded rather than hardened. There was a time when I thought I'd be carrying that room around for the rest of my life. The fluorescent light, the laptop screen, the way he turned it toward me like he was presenting a case. But memory is strange. It compresses. What stays isn't always the wound. Sometimes what stays is just a door you walked through, and the fact that once you were on the other side, you didn't go back. The studio is cold in the mornings this time of year. I have a small wood stove in the corner that I got going around 6 before the light comes up. I make coffee. I sit for a while before I start working because I've learned that's necessary, not optional, not indulgent, actually required for the work to be any good. Outside the window, the vineyard rows run in parallel lines down toward the fence line. Someone tended them for years before I was here. I don't know who. I think about that sometimes. The labor invisible in the landscape, the patience of it, the way you don't get to see what you're building toward when you're in the middle of it. My friend is visiting next month. My brother has been threatening to learn how to make pasta from scratch, which I've told him I'll believe when I see it. I work every day. The pieces are getting stranger, I think, less concerned with being liked. My professor was right about the clay. It does remember pressure. So do the hands that shape it. I told them they were just cups. They were never just cups. I've thought a lot about what my father actually believed when he closed that laptop and told me to find somewhere else to live. I don't think he was being cruel for cruelty's sake. I think he genuinely couldn't see what he was looking at, and that distinction matters to me now, even though for a long time it didn't. There's something that happens when you grow up in a house where worth is measured in credentials, in titles and programs, and the right kind of ambition. And it's this. You start to measure yourself that way too, even when you know better. You carry their ruler around. You use it on yourself at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. And you're doing the math on whether any of this is real or whether you've been wrong about everything. What changed for me wasn't the money. I want to be clear about that because I think it's the part people get wrong when they hear a story like this. The sale didn't prove anything to my father. It didn't change what he thought of me, not fundamentally. What it did was give me enough distance, physical, financial, psychological, to stop needing his ruler. That's the thing no one tells you about building something on your own terms. It's not that you win. It's that eventually you stop keeping score. My brother called me a few days after I talked to our mother. He said he was proud of me, not for the money. He was specific about that, but for the way I'd handled the call, for setting terms without cruelty, for helping without collapsing. I didn't know how to receive that at the time. I said something deflecting, probably, but I've thought about it since. The idea that integrity isn't something you perform for an audience. It's something you do in the moments when no one's watching and there's no version of the story where you come out looking good regardless. I helped my father because it was the right thing, knowing he might never acknowledge it, knowing it would probably be absorbed into the family silence the way most things were. He never mentioned it again. I used to think that would hurt more than it did. What I've learned, slowly, imperfectly, still learning, is that the choices you make under pressure are the ones that build you. Not the sales figures, not the property. The moment you choose not to become the thing that was done to you. My father controlled because he feared. I could have carried that forward. I didn't. Not perfectly, but I tried not to. That trying is the whole thing, I think. That's where the character actually lives. The clay remembers pressure. My professor said that years ago, and I've never stopped thinking about it. What she meant technically is that the material holds the memory of where force was applied. It shows up later in the firing, in the way the piece holds or breaks. But I think about it differently now. I think we remember pressure too. The question is whether we let it make us rigid or whether we learn, over time, to work with it, to shape something out of what was done to us instead of just carrying the weight of it. I still work every morning before the light comes up. I still sit with my coffee in the cold studio and give myself that time before I touch anything. My brother comes for dinner on Wednesdays. My friend is visiting next month. The vineyard runs in rows down to the fence line. It's enough. It's more than enough.